This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation. Good day, all of you, the viewers of Common Sense Generation. I have a wonderful guest with me, Peter Berkowitz, the Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. Thank you very much for showing up.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We are trying to create this sphere of free thought, a platform of expression for intellectuals. And you as a scholar, as an intellectual, you've talked about something very interesting, and those are the modern practices of freedom.
Yes.
And it's a broad way to say what exactly?
Well, it's a broad way. It's another way of referring to the liberal tradition. Sometimes people speak of classical liberalism. I'm not shy about that, but the term liberalism has acquired a lot of baggage over the years. But I mean, when I speak of the modern tradition of freedom, I mean a wide range of thinkers since about the 17th century that accepted a basic premise about human beings. That basic premise is that human beings, one way of putting it, John Locke put it this way, Thomas Jefferson, the American Declaration put it this way, human beings are by nature free and equal. In other words, it puts a certain dignity for all human beings. And the second thought is that it's the job of governments to protect this basic dignity. And in the United States, and in many other countries now, we think of this dignity in terms of individual rights. But just to deal with one objection very quickly, that doesn't mean we're not concerned about other aspects of life, about community, about faith, about family. But it means the government's most important task is to protect the rights we equally share.
So the rights of but when those rights come in a paradox with other rights. So very often this is the clash of, let's say, human rights and the freedom. Oh, I think in US, but also in Europe, we have this clash of those values and rights. For example, when we have certain religious practices which violate human rights, the circumcision of women, let's say. Or polygamy. And this is this moment when we have to decide which of those values is more important. And what's the liberal answer to it?
Yes, so we need to back up because you present some of the most difficult questions, the clash of rights, and we have to be prepared for that. But we have to understand about this tradition that it begins with an assertion that there are certain rights that are really fundamental, really important. In the United States, we call them inalienable or natural. They include religious liberty, for example. They include freedom of speech. They include rights before courts. But of course, we can pretty quickly see conflicts. Why? Let's take religious liberty, because one of your examples has to do with religious liberty. So we believe within this broad tradition that to the extent possible, individuals and their communities should be able to worship God and practice their faith without interference from the state. But we do have a basic limitation. You can't violate laws that are applied generally to all the other populations. So I'm going to take an extreme example. What if you belong to a religion that believes in child sacrifice? Should you be free because we've had religions like that in history.
And in the US.
Yes, and the answer is absolutely not, because nobody is allowed to kill innocent human beings, even for religious reasons. So religious liberty means government can't impose upon you particular religious beliefs, but that doesn't exempt you from all the other basic laws. So let's take one of your examples. Remind me the examples that you gave.
A circumcision of women.
Female.
Yes.
Yeah. So that would be a case where many people within the modern liberal tradition would say that's a mutilation of the body that actually impairs sexual function for the rest of life. You can't do that to children.
But at the same moment, we have those liberal traditions, of course, in US, but also in Europe. And still we have this clash that the state, in this case, doesn't protect their citizens. For example, in London, or I don't know what's the statistic in US, but I guess London, Paris are just two hubs of such procedures in Europe, and of course some of the this is this I would say paradox of the left. At the same moment, we want to of course embrace all the variety of multiculturalism, but on the other hand, we want to protect the rights of women. But the rights of women in our Western meaning of them.
Yes. So here you're now getting to the crux of the matter. In the United States, we have not only multiculturalism, I think you do too in Europe, but identity politics. Here's the problem. Identity politics and multiculturalism tend to argue that rights inhere in groups, not in individuals. The modern tradition of freedom rejects that idea. It doesn't say each group has the right to do to the members of the group whatever it wishes. The modern liberal tradition is not hostile to groups. If individuals want to form groups, please do so. We protect a framework in which you can. But again, we draw a minimum, a floor below which nobody can go. And we don't say this group has its set of rights, this group has its set of rights, this group has its set of rights. We say all individuals, regardless of what group they belong to, have rights. And in general, if it's defined, and there's controversies about definitions, but generally, and for the most part, we do not allow adults to mutilate the bodies of children, regardless of religion.
So those basic rights are more important, of course, than the freedom of practice, religion practice. So they are more natural, let's say, to the other rights which come as a result of the society.
Yes. Now we do have a problem within modern society, and the problem, I think, is the proliferation of rights, the great expansion of rights.
Right to be happy, right to live, be prosperous, everything else which suddenly is in fact a prerogative of a state.
Right to flat water and mineral water, all kinds of things. And notice the trick involved. Notice the trick involved, yes. What happens if I take my policy preference? Let's say I like mineral water, and I call it a right. As soon as I get it recognized as a right, it becomes something that's objective and necessary and morally required. Whereas, if it's just a policy preference, I like mineral water, you like flat water, okay, we can have a debate and we'll see what the majority says. So I'm deeply concerned about the proliferation of rights. And I know you all have a big problem with this, the European Court of Justice, and the transformation of policy preferences into rights demands. That's a big danger, but I don't see that as essential to the modern tradition of freedom. I see it as a perversion of the modern tradition of freedom.
But all of those concerns or problems, they exist in the modern Western societies.
They do.
So because they come from this way of thinking, they come from the fact that the freedom is a right here. For certain groups it's treated as an ultimate right, for others it's treated as a tool which creates space for other values or rights to grow and to exist. But it doesn't occur, in fact, in other parts of in other forms of civilization. So in other, using the Huntingtons, in the other civilizations, they exist and grow in our civilization. Is it a paradox of liberal tradition, or is it just something which right now we somehow put ourselves in? As you mentioned, the identity, the problems.
I think we're seeing problems that grow up within the liberal tradition, but I don't think it's the essence of the liberal tradition. We have lost our balance, and to some extent we have lost our way. So my recommendation is that we return to our roots and rethink what's fundamental, which rights are fundamental, and that we avoid the mistake of turning legitimate policy differences into rights questions. Because what happens then is if I get my policy preference converted into a right, I take it off the table for discussion. That's going to, if you disagree with me, that's going to make you angry, and that's going to polarize our politics. So we have to go back and look at what are the basics. I regard one of the basics as religious liberty. Now, I do not regard protection of religious liberty as anti-groups or community. I actually think in modern, industrial, commercial societies, protecting an individual's religious liberty is the best way to protect religion. Because I want, at the end of the day, I have two choices. Who's going to be responsible for religion? Government or individuals and their communities? I trust more individuals and the communities of which they're a part.
So isn't it like there's a lot of those bubbles which of rights, for example, of other concerns in the Western world? They sort of come from this expectation of groups of society that the government, that the state resolves most of our problems. That by bringing certain regulations, but we very often forget that if we won't have those rights, then in fact we are giving the state more power to resolve them, and as subsidiarity rule always points us out, that it is better to resolve certain problems at the local level, even if we have to find a new way and we have to engage people in order to do it.
Exactly. A lot of these questions we face in politics are questions about which authority is best positioned to resolve controversies, disagreements. And I am with those who support the Catholic doctrine of subsidiarity. In the United States, we have a different but related doctrine of federalism. In federalism, we distribute powers between the central government in Washington, D.C., and the governments in the 50 states, and those governments in the 50 states also distribute power between themselves and cities. And in general, we want also in the United States that those people who are most affected by the laws to have a say in what those laws will be. So I think that's a good way to govern. And the protection of religious liberty, you can see the protection of religious liberty as a form of subsidiarity. It means in the United States, the government, to the extent possible, is going to stay out of religious questions. Now, if you're engaging in child sacrifice, we draw the line. But we're not going to tell you the kinds of prayers. We're not going to instruct you on how to interpret Scripture. We're not going to tell you in what language you should conduct your religious services. It's all up to you.
And again, this division between religious practices and the state, this is also an inheritance of liberal tradition.
Very much so. And, a lot of people make a mistake. They look at the American way of doing it and they think this is anti-religious. You see, the state shows that it doesn't care about religion because it doesn't get involved in people's religious lives. This was not the original vision. The original vision, remember, in the United States, founded in the 18th century, we were a country of many different Protestant denominations. We experienced this as tremendous religious diversity. What could we do about it? There were lots of disagreements about Christians, Protestant Christians, about how to interpret God's will, how to live in accordance with God's will. And we came to the conclusion, government cannot resolve these questions. We will leave it to the churches of Massachusetts and the churches of Pennsylvania and the churches of Virginia. So that it was understood to be a religion-friendly resolution. Now, different countries in Europe, some are smaller countries, some have greater religious homogeneity, sameness. So there, it may be possible for government to be more involved. But in an enormous country like the United States, which begins with tremendous religious diversity, even though it was within Christianity, the religion-friendly approach was to keep government removed.
Why is it important that things which happen in US affects all the other world? Of course, because US is this huge hegemony, which either through language or through the Navy and the Pacific rules the trade routes. And this is also why everything what happens in US comes sooner or later also to Europe and to the rest of the world. And this happens also with something called the identity policy.
Sorry about that.
You brought it, it's sort of a plague, but it happens. And it starts to happen here in Europe as well. And funny thing where it leads to us, but in fact it leads to very lonely individuals who don't create and formulate families. So they stop, and they will stop on one generation. We of course haven't seen the outcomes of it because it's too fresh, it's too young. But the result of it is not, of course, as a result of the society or a group. It makes us even more polarized in this way that, but young people seem to be even more and more lost. I guess previously, if you were 20 years old, the question was what I'm supposed to do, who I'm coming to become in a matter of profession. But right now, when you are 15 or 16, then this matter shifted. Of course, who I am, but am I a woman? Am I a man? Am I someone in between? What is my identity? Where do I come from? What I'm supposed to do with my body, with everything? And those are real concerns and problems of young people who are shaping their bodies, the way they look, the way they appear, their sexual activities, to become neutral, in the middle. Where does it come from?
It does come from a pathology that we see generated by this world of freedom. This is a radicalization of the hope for freedom. Remember, the modern tradition of freedom begins with the idea in the 17th century that individuals need to be free from arbitrary authority of other individuals or government to shape their lives. That originally meant you marry whom you wish to marry, you worship God as you wish to worship, you can express your opinions as you wish. But we were seeking emancipation in this tradition from authoritarian government. Over the years, the decades, the centuries, the demand for freedom, and it's a perversion, grew larger and larger. Not ultimately, but we sought eventually an emancipation from traditions. And we demanded government help emancipate us even from traditions. And now what we're seeing with the transgender ideology is the desire to be free from nature itself. How dare you say to me that there are only two sexes, that there are two kinds of chromosome combinations, XX or XY? Are you implying that I am not free to choose? Yes. Now, we're not suggesting anybody should be discriminated against, but that there are two sexes is a biological fact, and no amount of wishing or desiring or reconceiving of yourself enables you to emancipate yourself from those irreducible facts. So you can see this as a continuation of the quest for freedom, but a continuation that has spun out of control. And so I want to remove us back to the original promise, which was limiting government's role in the largest questions, but not some kind of, in my view, dystopian fantasy of emancipating us from tradition, emancipating us even from the imperatives of physical nature.
And this quest of getting rid of even the laws of nature, is it a way of trying to fill this void, which is of course in all of us, and the void which St. Augustine would describe as my soul is restless until it calms down in God, yeah. And because of this, of course, the waves of getting rid of all the forms of religion as a form of enslavement or restricting freedom or something irrational, not reasonable, and everything else, it makes this void even bigger.
I fear that the answer is yes, that the modern world has in important ways undertaken an attack on tradition and faith, that this has left many individuals, especially young people, unanchored, unmoored, and this quest for emancipation from even biological nature becomes a spiritual quest. And I think it does reflect a misguided search, a misguided quest for meaning. And so my own view is that we need to return to the fundamentals of the modern tradition of freedom to see that it's actually not hostile to traditional faith. It's not hostile to traditional teachings about moral excellence. In fact, it creates room in a complex modern commercial world for individuals to worship and to pursue excellence.
One of the patterns when there is extremism at a certain level, very often it goes the other way around. So it is a very short path between national socialism, so in fact the fascism, to the communism. I mean, this path is very narrow. They're very close to each other, because when at least it seems like that one extremism, when we try to pull something on one way around, then it goes back to the other. So when we have this express of total loss of identity, then on the other spectrum of the society comes all the religious extremism, because people want to defend themselves from the void of values.
From the void.
From the void of everything is allowed, all sexual forms are allowed. I remember I was asking one of the Muslims in Paris why they become so extreme in their beliefs, why they become so radical on their practices, where, for example, the grandparents were not. And he told me this, because what's happening, for example, in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral, secular masses which make fun of a mass and the cross, wouldn't be possible in a Muslim country, would be illegal. So they see this distraction of values. They see this, and they are so much afraid of it that it leads them to the to the extremism on the other way.
Yeah, so I think this is it's a different kind of problem. This is a religious group that finds toleration and diversity a threat to its own religious practices. So that's one kind of problem that emerges in under the conditions of freedom. Another problem that we've been talking about is the emptying out of faith. So many people respond to both problems and say, okay, the modern tradition of freedom has discredited itself. We need something else. My own view is that that's the wrong conclusion. We need to recover a better understanding of what the core principles of freedom are and how we can organize our political society so we maintain real toleration, maintain real civility, and maintain political societies that are hospitable, welcoming to communities of faith.
And this is a great punchline for this interview. Again, thank you very much for being here. And to all of you, the viewers of Common Sense Generation, it seems like the coming back to the traditional liberalism might be the answer of many problems of the modern free Western societies. If this is your point of view, write it down under the comment under this video, and thank you very much for watching our show. And I also thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible. This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.